Our two guests today know all about having to innovate out of necessity. Innovate out of necessity. That is a key phrase. I want to welcome Gugu Nkabinde, brand strategist, solutions architect, and the trailblazing founder of the underwear or undergarment company, because she'll tell us she's expanded, Gugu Intimates, along with Professor Rodney Ganga, head of academic development for the Wits Faculty of Engineering and Built Environment, also founder of the academic startup, the East African Institute of Machining, Manufacturing Research. It is so nice to welcome the two of you to the program today. Gugu, I know the story because you and I have spoken on many occasions before, but let's dive into it. What made you start the organization? But more importantly, I want to explore where the spark of innovation came from.
So I love how you emphasized innovation out of necessity, because I think it becomes a question of necessity to whom, right? And for me, something like underwear was considered something cosmetic at the time. And I actually wore a white shirt on purpose today because it's actually one of those, that was the spark for me that spoke to why undergarments need to be more functional.
I know that it's your old party trick, I know the
Yes, it's my old party trick with the white shirt, don't fall for it. So for me, the spark came when I, as a female, could not find a nude shade of underwear that complemented my skin tone. And I think the challenge in innovation comes in whether you're okay with unknowing that question after you ask it. So once you ask the question, if you can match your makeup, why can't you match your underwear? It becomes quite hard to unsee. It was almost as though the question started to become in my face. And being the solutions architect I've known myself to be over the years, I started to ask the question as to why that was so. And the why that was so just made it impossible for me to not just do it. But the other eureka moment was in realizing what the difference between the underwear that existed and what I wanted to create was. Then it was like, okay, so just take the gap.
Rodney,
it's possible.
We've just met, so I'm not going to ask you a question about underwear.
Please.
I just think that would be awkward for all concerned.
Scared.
But what I am going to ask you, and it is a serious question, you're trying to shape innovation. You want to be a thought leader in innovation on the continent. How are you trying to shift development, and why are you doing it?
Mine starts in 2013. I finished my master's, started my PhD in materials engineering. And the reason I went into a postgraduate into materials engineering is because it's a space where we're able to take advantage of minerals around us, because Africa is mineral rich. But one of the biggest challenges we've had is how do we beneficiate it? And you find that you can take it out of the ground, but you have to send it somewhere where somebody else will process it and convert it to an element that's...
It's an age-old argument.
Yes, you know. Yep. But I had a life-shaking moment when I traveled to Austria for a conference, and the opening speaker was this global leader. He's called Professor Hamann, and he gives an economic presentation. He doesn't give it in terms of what we're doing in our research. In 2013, at the time, Africa population is just about 1 billion people. And he says, come 2050, we will double in numbers. And it shook me like a ton of bricks. Twice the number of people on this continent with the resources we have a real issue. Because, yes, we can educate enough people to go out into industry, but it's still not enough. So I decided, you know what, let's look at it from a bigger perspective. How do we educate people to innovate? How do we create access to industry where the innovation can be produced? How do you create market for them to access, but also how do you give them access to capital? And that's what sparked the generation of the institute we are developing and building.
Is innovation in a person inherent, or can you teach it?
Innovation is intuitive to this continent. Literally, if you go to any urban or even rural area, you'll always find somebody making a plan. Typically.
Intuitive by necessity.
Yes, by necessity. You don't have all the resources, but you make a plan. And now if you can educate on how people can capitalize on this innate gift that we have, put it in a space where they've got access to a market. How do we create an environment where this can be successful, that can translate into manufacturing? Because if you don't manufacture, you will never grow a developing world into a developed structure. You just can't get around it. And that's what we're targeting to develop and enhance.
How did you bridge the gap then between innovation and then the stuff that you had to do?
I think firstly, before you even get into figuring out the steps and finding the wherewithal to follow through, is it's got to be a big enough problem. So often is the responsibility around the innovation that will drive you through. What happens next is a series of research, is a series of inquiries, a series of, actually, for me, the blessing of corporate experience, to be honest, knowing how to then collect all that information and put it into place. So
And systemize it.
And systemize it. The systemizing of it, and we take for granted how much we need to teach structural thinking so that you even know how to place any problem within that. Do you know what I mean? Teaching people how to think, how to know when the next step is, so that regardless of the problem, then we can.
So, Rodney, Gugu's given us an impressive list. In teaching the process of taking innovation to market, in your experience then, where are the deficiencies?
How does one even teach innovation? Already we have the natural gift. Everywhere, look, literally everybody makes a plan. Well, if you can recognize that need, the next thing is how do you access a solution that is repeatable and reliable? Then how do you access a market that will be able to make this available to that? And then how do you put an economic value to what you're trying to build? And lastly, how you keep it within an environmentally friendly space, because I'm in the engineering space. So we always look at how do you keep it safe and sustainable in terms of how you build that up.
All right, in terms of this conversation, let's assume now that we're at base camp.
Yes.
So things have started to move. All of a sudden, there's a seismic shift. Something happens to rock the boat. Precisely.
COVID happens.
COVID happens. So let's look at it academically and let's look at it practically. How did you deal with it?
For me, something as big as COVID shook me to the way in which I was already getting the kind of insights, watching neighbors around me inside Rosebank Mall, for example, closing down before COVID. And I started to question whether it is entirely practical to keep insisting on a hardcore brick and mortar retail model when the overheads are so high. So when do you start doing business? I was primarily, as a marketer, insistent on building a brand, a B2C brand, get people to demand the product and then start to look at how retailers would take on and want to satisfy that demand. I just didn't know when was, you know? COVID showed me that it's actually now, because immediately after that and the retail environment changed, we got our first retailer coming forward to say, listen, everyone's shopping online now. Come on board. You've built the brand. We need to let them know they can find you with us.
So what's your sense in dealing with those seismic shifts? Is there a template? Is there a blueprint?
Well, I like templates, so I'm a dangerous person to ask for templates. But to be honest with you, the reason you were even able to innovate in the first place was your ability to think differently. And also, one must also be prepared to cut losses. You might realize that this was something that I really wanted to do. It's not working anymore.
Kill your darlings.
Yes.
Yeah.
One also needs to look, again, do you understand your market? Do you understand who you're trying to reach and who you're trying to engage with? And what I mean by this is there's certain products within Africa, whether it rains gold or whether it snows, this is a resource. By investing in those, it's socio-cultural good because you help build those economies, but also at the same time, you put yourself in a space where you'll always be relevant.
Very quickly, how do you determine when the pivot has worked? Is there a yardstick? Is there a measurement on what the pivot is? Or is that like measuring smoke?
Well, again, I'm coming from an engineering background. You sort of put checks and balances in terms of what you're trying to achieve. Having a set of tools that can help you measure your objectives keeps you in line in terms of that.
Do you have that set of tools? Final question.
How you determine whether the pivot has worked is when you look at those primary kind of measurement kind of points. Is it sales? Is it, so for sometimes if it was brand health, then don't go and beat yourself down over other people's success measures when yours for that particular period was, for example, just to have a stronger brand, just to connect better. So being clear about what it is that you're going to do within a particular period. And for me, that has become, those tools have really become listening. We throw around the term social listening so much, but there is so much value in not sitting in a little hole and thinking that you did that profile of your consumer and you know who they are. They're changing every day just like you. So looking at my data consistently, looking at my stock, looking at my inventory.
And Rodney got very excited when you mentioned the word data, but we're not going to talk about it. Thank you very much indeed, Gugu Nkabinde and Professor Rodney Ganga. Thank you so much for adding an enormous amount of value to this important debate of entrepreneurship in South Africa and on the continent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you, Gugu, as well.